My mother-in-law wants me to give my firstborn up for adoption to my sister-in-law because her plan to have 6 children isn't going well, but I laughed so hard I almost went into labor right then and there. I honestly don't even know how to start this, because if you've read the title, you already know my mother-in-law is absolutely insane, though to be fair, my sister-in-law isn't too far behind her. In school, we never had writing workshops where, instead of writing what I did over the weekend, we'd write essays titled How my mother-in-law wants me to give my firstborn up for adoption because otherwise my sister-in-law will fall into deep depression. Anyway, I'm 26 years old, in case you're wondering, and I'm pregnant with my first child. It's a boy, according to the ultrasound. We found out a while ago and have been planning everything around that wonderful news. My husband is 29, and we're both happy soon-to-be parents who can't wait to meet our baby, even though he wasn't planned and we're not exactly excited about the upcoming sleepless nights. But when we got the news, we were thrilled. We hadn't planned to have kids this soon, maybe in a few years, but we're grateful for the blessing of our firstborn. Now comes the problem, and you probably already know where this is headed, because it involves in-laws. I know this subreddit doesn't have much love for these particular creatures who, instead of coming out at night to scare misbehaving children, prefer to show up in broad daylight to torment their daughters-in-law. My beloved mother-in-law is 55 years old, though if I told you she was 55 months old, you might believe me. My sister-in-law, who is also a problem, is 32. She's the eldest daughter and, of course, her mother's favorite. They're thick as thieves, so much alike that it's honestly a nightmare. No one should resemble my mother-in-law that closely unless they're trying to create a monster. Maybe I'm exaggerating about my sister-in-law, or maybe not, but the issue is that my mother-in-law loves to feed her daughter's fantasies, and that part is important later. While the rest of the family was delighted when we shared our pregnancy news, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law reacted in completely opposite ways. We broke the news to everyone via video call because we were all snowed in and couldn't meet in person. My father-in-law, who's 57, was overjoyed and emotional, which instantly made him the good in-law. Yes, they do exist. My mother-in-law, on the other hand, went completely silent, while my sister-in-law literally burst into tears and ran out of the room crying. My mother-in-law followed her, saying very little. The call ended awkwardly, and then we got bombarded with messages from my mother-in-law accusing us of being insensitive for how we shared the news. Then came a flood of nasty texts from my sister-in-law, calling us selfish and malicious. Now, you might be wondering why they reacted that way, aside from being completely unhinged. Well, my sister-in-law has been actively trying to get pregnant for the past 8 years. She got married at 22 and started trying at 24. She's obsessed with having a big family. She's always talking about having 6 kids, and not being able to conceive has been eating her alive. Look, I sympathize with her, I really do, but what exactly did she expect us to do? We actually told them before announcing it publicly because we wanted her to have time to process the news. Apparently, nothing was enough. For the first 3 months after we told them, both my mother-in-law and sister-in-law kept their distance and rarely showed any interest in the baby. My mother-in-law joined a few times here and there and even attended the gender reveal, but that ended with my sister-in-law crying loudly because she had also wanted her first child to be a boy. So she's been sulking and keeping her distance most of the time. My mother-in-law sometimes tries to look excited, but then she goes on about how unfair it is that her eldest daughter still can't have the family of her dreams. My husband and I had mostly been ignoring them until the day the dynamic duo made the most ridiculous demand imaginable. They came over to our house and told us that we should give our firstborn to my sister-in-law. Why? Because that would give her a head start on building the family she's always wanted. No, I'm not joking. I don't even know why I'm bothering to explain why. The request was already absurd enough without a justification. But yes, they wanted me to legally give my baby up for adoption to her. Their reasoning? That since this pregnancy wasn't planned, we'd probably feel overwhelmed once the baby arrived, while my sister-in-law had been preparing for this moment for 8 years. So, according to them, it made perfect sense for her to have him instead. They said we could always try again in a few years, and my sister-in-law would finally be able to check one baby off her list of 6. My husband and I thought about it for maybe half a second before saying no in perfect unison. There might have been some uncontrollable laughter involved too, perhaps even tears from laughing so hard. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law weren't laughing, though. They were throwing massive tantrums, yelling, insulting, and crying, while we could barely stop laughing long enough to respond. We told them, between fits of laughter, that we were absolutely not giving up our child, mainly because we were laughing so hard I thought I was going to go into labor right there. If that had happened, the scene would have been unforgettable. When my husband finally caught his breath, his face as red as mine from laughing, he threw them out of the house. After they left, we eventually stopped laughing and went back to our boring, joke-free lives. We honestly thought they'd gotten the message and wouldn't come back, assuming they'd finally run out of whatever hallucinogenic mushrooms they'd been eating. But we were wrong, they clearly had a whole stash. Now my mother-in-law won't stop calling and texting us, saying our selfishness and insensitivity are pushing her daughter into depression. My sister-in-law just keeps hurling insults because, in her head, she already pictured holding the baby in her arms, so she sees him as hers. Meanwhile, my husband and I are still laughing about it. But a week has passed and the joke isn't nearly as funny anymore. Of course for them it's not a joke, because they mean it, which only makes it more ridiculous to me. My best guess right now is that several things have mixed together. One could be my mother-in-law's menopause, added to my sister-in-law's desperation to have a baby, plus some cocktail of hallucinogens, and it gave them the terrible idea that they can adopt my baby. No sane mind could come up with something like that, but my mother-in-law is anything but sane. Edit, I'll try to answer some questions here. I can't tell you why my sister-in-law hasn't been able to have children. She refuses to see a doctor because she's convinced she can conceive naturally and is just taking longer. There's no problem with her husband, he got tests on his own, but he still couldn't convince her to go to the doctor. My husband and I tried to encourage her to see a specialist because we knew her fertility issues were messing with her head, literally, but every time we brought it up she'd explode at us and insult us, convinced we were mocking her and calling her a failure as a woman. Over time we stopped trying, it wasn't our problem. For those who think I'm mocking my sister-in-law for not having a baby, you clearly can't read. I mock the absurd idea they've had. That's the only healthy way to handle this situation, because building drama in my head about my in-laws being crazy would only cause problems with my pregnancy. And yes, I thought for a moment another laugh would make me literally launch across the room into the bookshelf. My mother-in-law always fed my sister-in-law's fantasies and encouraged her to keep trying instead of pressuring her to see a doctor. I don't know whether she expected us never to have children or thought her daughter would have the first baby before we even started planning. Clearly she's jealous that I got pregnant without trying. I always felt bad for my sister-in-law, but honestly now I'm kind of over it. It's hard to feel empathy for someone who won't seek medical and psychiatric help and has ideas like this. My sister-in-law and I were never super close, but we weren't mortal enemies either, and she isn't close to my husband either, so it's not like they were only targeting me. My mother-in-law had been nice to me sometimes, but she values her daughter above everyone when it comes to her delusions. I'm starting to see where my sister-in-law gets her personality. My mother-in-law is just like her daughter, and that gives me a headache. My husband joked about asking Reddit for help, though he doesn't know I actually followed through with the joke. I don't think he'd mind. Update 1. The harassment from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law hasn't stopped, and although it was funny for a while, it's time to get back to our boring life and stop treating them like clowns. My friends know what's going on and suggested the same things many of you have, but I know they're biased, so we appreciate neutral opinions. Some of you said we should sit my mother-in-law down, maybe tie her up and slap some sense into her, and tell her to stop or there will be consequences. Love the Sicilian solutions, but I don't know how legal that would be here. This woman doesn't care that she's hurting her own son and daughter-in-law with her words and actions. I thought she was a decent person, but damn, now I'm doubting my own judgments. Most of you suggested sending them a text as a last chance to redeem themselves. Something like this is your last chance to be decent. So we're going to send my mother-in-law and sister-in-law a message warning that if they don't stop harassing us and treating us this way there will be consequences for them. I don't know how much good it will do, they seem determined to get my child. My husband suggested buying a talking doll and giving it to them. They're that crazy, it might actually work, but horror movies teach that talking dolls come to life and start killing people, and sadly they never seem to start with mothers-in-law. Some of you advised more empathy. One thing is to empathize with my sister-in-law's situation, another is to entertain mystical delusions that verge on madness. At this point I don't know how dangerous they can get or what else they might do if this continues. My baby shower is coming up and I'm terrified of seeing them there. We've thought about canceling it altogether. I've even considered banning them from the hospital and not allowing them to see the baby, maybe hiring Super Bowl level security so they can't burst in by force. Update 2. Today I hope to bring good news, or even better, hoped I wouldn't need to post another update at all and that this story would sink into Reddit's pages and disappear. But here we are with another update, because they've gone completely insane. Yesterday I was quietly at home when the doorbell rang, and guess who I found on the other side of the door? My mother-in-law and my sister-in-law. You're not mistaken, it was Child Protective Services at my door. God, I'm writing this trying to keep it light but inside I'm boiling. I was already feeling a bit down from everything and this visit from Child Protective Services shook me to the core. The people who came were extremely confused when I told them I'm pregnant with a boy but he hasn't been born yet, and they kept asking to see my older child and I pointed to my belly saying this is all the older child you'll find here. After a long and confusing conversation it became clear to everyone present that someone had made a false report. Child Protective Services didn't give me many details but it seems someone called and told them I was beating my under 1-year-old, that was all the social workers would say. They thought I literally had a newborn at home I was allegedly mistreating. Imagine their surprise and annoyance when they discovered they'd been lied to. The child protective workers looked extremely angry and assured me I had nothing to worry about since they were there. I took the opportunity to ask them a question. I wanted to know if they take cases where a 32-year-old woman is being abused by her mother. I only got confused looks. There were already several of us that day and they also inspected the house and everything else to make sure there was nothing. No secret baby chained in the basement with a dog food bowl or whatever. I called my husband and for about 5 minutes he was like well probably breaking some traffic rules to get there. He spoke with the child protection workers and gave them all the details about my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. He also said he would have liked to report his mother for child abuse against his sister. Again the Child Protective Services couldn't confirm anything but we all know who made that ridiculous call. After all the caller had given a name that was meant for my unborn baby. So it had to be someone in the family. Anyway, after they left my husband told me, I'm going to kill them even if I have to use my own hands. I'm going to kill them. I said no, I don't want you to do that. There's a baby coming and I can't do this alone while you're in jail. Plus I want to kill them first. You're not taking that from me. Consider it a gift for having our child. We rested most of the night. I know my husband wants to talk about what happened. Flip a coin to decide who kills his mother and sister. But if he doesn't give me that then I'll divorce him. It's that simple. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law keep trying to contact us and leave nasty messages despite being blocked. They've only become more creative and are exhausting other people's phone numbers. I'm considering unblocking them to keep that as evidence and involve lawyers. My father-in-law remains silent and says little. I don't know what to think of him. Update 3. We finally had a long talk with my husband to decide our next steps since this has become a serious matter. Now we know for certain that my mother-in-law and sister-in-law made the call to get us in trouble or possibly to have our baby taken from us. We know because my father-in-law called my husband with this information. He'd overheard my mother-in-law and my sister-in-law talking about how Child Protective Services would take our child as soon as he was born, then they would obtain custody of the baby and work to make us relinquish our parental rights. My father-in-law didn't waste time contacting my husband to warn us about what he heard. My husband and I have spoken with him and told him what happened. My father-in-law is beside himself with rage and shock. I understand he's between a rock and a hard place. Now I know my father-in-law is completely on our side, but he doesn't know how to handle my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. I get it, they're his wife and daughter, so he really hit the worst kind of lottery. I know it's hard for him to take sides in this ridiculous battle, and we're not going to pressure or blame him for trying to stay neutral. I mean, he literally called to warn us about the Child Protective Services report, a little late, sure, but the intention was there, and that's what matters. We discussed a few things with him and left it at that. My husband and I decided to unblock my mother-in-law and sister-in-law to let them throw their venom directly at us. We're not masochists. Well, I won't talk about what we do in bed, but we need this. We want to collect evidence and sue them. I know the idea of taking their lives with our bare hands is far more tempting, but the legal route is the sensible one. All jokes aside, we can all see that my mother-in-law and sister-in-law are completely losing it, spiraling into total madness. A good lawsuit, maybe with charges for filing false reports, might help them come to their senses, and if not, more lawsuits it is. We could spend all day suing left and right if that's what they want. My husband and I have a meeting with a lawyer tomorrow to discuss our options, whether to send a cease and desist letter or file a harassment claim. I know Child Protective Services will take their own action, since there are consequences for filing a false report, especially with my father-in-law's testimony, though I doubt it'll amount to much, probably just a slap on the wrist. Still, at least it's something. I wish I had better news for you, but if I were really taking revenge with my own hands, I wouldn't be here telling you about it. I'd probably be watching Dexter and taking notes on how to leave no evidence behind. My husband and I have already informed my mother-in-law and sister-in-law that they're forbidden from contacting us, approaching us, or trying to harass us in any way. We've cut off all contact with them for good. They didn't take it well, but that was expected. I know they won't give up easily, but I'm desperately hoping this ends soon. Update 4 *. Oh God, my prayers weren't heard, how I wish they had been. Things have gotten a bit worse since my last update. I hoped my mother-in-law and sister-in-law would back off after Child Protective Services reported them for making that false claim. I assumed they'd be busy dealing with the police and court, and maybe take the hint to leave us alone. They've received a lawyer's notice to stop harassing me, and it's not a "please stop bothering us, do it for our sake" type of notice. It's more like * stop your crap now or the lawyer's going to leave you with a bill worth thousands shoved up your ass. *. Sorry, they chose the path of madness and destroyed their own lives in the process. That's why today I woke up speaking French. My husband had been receiving nasty texts and voice messages accusing me of cheating, calling me fat, and, the craziest of all, claiming that our baby will be born sick because of me. It takes every ounce of strength not to use my own hands to wrap around their little necks and snap them. God, give me strength. Luckily, my husband is completely on my side. He even said that if they were ever sentenced to death, which obviously won't happen, and besides, it's not legal in our state, he'd give me the honor of pulling the lever. I don't know about you, but that's the most romantic thing he's ever said to me. And yes, I know there are people in the comments who think I'm violent and shouldn't wish death on anyone, much less cause it's a fucking joke. Though, I'll admit, sometimes they really do bring out that side of me. Especially since they even tried convincing my husband that once the baby was born, he should take him and run away with them. Of course, my husband ignored them. Just as we were trying to stay calm, my father-in-law showed up at our door looking like a drenched little chick. It turns out he'd had a huge fight with my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, who refused to admit they'd done anything wrong. He had been desperately trying to get them to stop harassing me and even wanted to send my sister-in-law to a psychiatrist. Yes, he wanted to have her committed, which honestly sounds like the best solution, but of course, they refused. What else could you expect? My father-in-law told us more about my sister-in-law's deranged behavior, which honestly scared both of us. After several arguments with them, he decided he didn't want to be part of their mess anymore. He left the house and threatened to divorce my mother-in-law if she didn't stop this insanity. That same day, my mother-in-law was officially notified that she was being sued for the false report. Apparently, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law completely lost it when they realized their plan had failed. They were actually in the process of making another call to Child Protective Services when my father-in-law grabbed the phone, and everything exploded. They had a massive fight, after which he told my mother-in-law he was done with her nonsense. Then he came to our house because he didn't want to stay while she was screaming at him. Today my father-in-law and my husband called my sister-in-law's husband, West, and told him what had been happening. He lives in another city for work. My sister-in-law stays at my in-law's house so she's not alone and had been unaware of everything. He was genuinely surprised and angry when he found out and said little other than that he would talk to my sister-in-law. Later I received quite aggressive messages from my sister-in-law calling me a homewrecker because her husband is now talking. About divorce, so it seems this whole fiasco has exploded the marriages of my mother-in-law and my sister-in-law. I have a bad feeling this will drag on and I'll get into more trouble. But as I said before, everything is material for reports and lawsuits. My husband and I hired a lawyer to do what he does best, sue the asses off entitled people. He also says he makes the best barbecues in the county, but we won't verify that until we've won. Meanwhile, my husband and I are doing everything we can to support my father-in-law, who is preparing to divorce my mother-in-law and seems very determined. He has plenty of reasons too. Update 5. Sorry for basically disappearing for a whole month. Too much happened and we had to deal with that pair of lunatics. I'm very close to my due date and could have the baby at any moment. The good news is that my mother-in-law and sister-in-law can no longer cause much drama or ruin the birth of my child. The bad news is that this progress came at a high price. Remember, we had sued my mother-in-law and sister-in-law and filed complaints against them hoping they'd calm down or the police would arrest them with all the evidence? Well, that didn't happen. Instead, things escalated in the worst possible way. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law ambushed me when I returned home after lunch with friends. They knew my husband wouldn't be home and that my father-in-law was at work. They wanted to corner me and I don't know what to do with me. They even referenced that I had said I wanted to strangle them with my own hands. But there were 2 of them and only me. Very pregnant. As soon as I saw them, I told them to leave before I called the police. They didn't look friendly and I knew they were coming to cause trouble. My mother-in-law tried to speak calmly and convince me to listen and stop causing problems. When I refused repeatedly, both of them lost it. They hurled insults and told me I was breaking their marriages. They called me everything and said I'd rot in hell. I was about to call my husband when my sister-in-law lunged at me out of nowhere and punched me in the face before my neighbor came out and pulled us apart. My mother-in-law somehow took her daughter away and they left while my neighbor took me to the hospital. I was very lucky not to suffer serious injuries. Yes, I had a horrible black eye, but at least my baby was fine. I was really angry with them and my husband was equally furious when he found out. My poor husband was in tears when he arrived at the hospital because he thought something terrible had happened to the baby, but also because of me. Then we went and involved the police and filed a report with footage from my neighbor's camera. That was finally enough to have my sister-in-law arrested, but because my mother-in-law didn't lay a hand on me, they left her alone. My mother-in-law ended up posting my sister-in-law's bail afterwards, but my sister-in-law is not allowed to come near us. Today we obtained emergency restraining orders against my sister-in-law. Surprisingly, we couldn't get a restraining order against my mother-in-law because she didn't physically harm me. The camera actually showed she tried to pull her daughter away from me, so it seems she didn't want me hurt after all. That doesn't absolve her of her wrongs. At least she has stopped contacting us directly. My mother-in-law managed to get my sister-in-law out of jail, but my sister-in-law had to be admitted to psychiatry because of how unstable she was. My father-in-law ended up helping with that because he really wanted his daughter to get help. I don't blame him. It's even good that she's hospitalized and not free to do any more crazy things. If her mother had done this earlier, we would have saved ourselves so much. I think my mother-in-law is finally waking up. Apparently she's been begging my father-in-law not to leave her and telling him she finally realized her mistake. Since she can't contact us, she's been telling my father-in-law she wants to apologize and do everything possible to make amends. My husband and I are not going to do that. You can take that to the bank. My sister-in-law may be mentally ill, but my mother-in-law is not to that degree. She should not have encouraged her daughter to get involved in these demands and deranged acts. We both distrust my mother-in-law deeply now and don't want her near our child. She will never be near our child, period. That's the final word. I hear from my father-in-law that he's trying hard to reconcile and repair things, but I think it's too late. I think my mother-in-law realized she ended up losing her son and her grandchild by making very twisted decisions in her life. The whole fiasco with my sister-in-law also made her see she should have taken her daughter to the doctor earlier. By the way, my sister-in-law is divorcing her husband. I think he's tired of her nonsense and doesn't want to stay married. Thank God he has work elsewhere and can get away from all this. My brother-in-law had tried harder to take her to fertility clinics and then to therapists to help her. My sister-in-law always ignored his pleas and did what she wanted. It didn't help that her mother supported her and fed her delusions. It turns out her husband never knew my sister-in-law had been pressuring my husband and me to hand over our child. I think that was the last straw for him. He had already decided long before my sister-in-law decided to attack me. Impossible to feel sorry for her now. She brought it on herself. My father-in-law is still thinking about divorce and nothing that has happened has changed his mind. We just hope my mother-in-law doesn't go as crazy as her daughter and do something against him or us. I think I've covered all the points here. Update 6. Hi, I'm happy to be a mother and that this is coming to an end. There's no better time for things to calm down than now. With a newborn, well, it would have been better if they'd calmed down while I was still pregnant. Buddha, Allah, God, whoever saved me a bit. My sister-in-law remains hospitalized, and to prevent the judge sending her to prison she must continue her treatment at the facility. My father-in-law is paying for it, but it's the best for everyone. If they had sent her 6 months to prison she probably would have come out equally or more crazy. Treatment is the best solution for everyone and we want that when she's discharged she leaves us alone for good. She will continue under a restraining order so even when recovered she can't be near us. It wouldn't be her first offense and her psychiatric record would send her back there. Yes, we tried our lawyer's barbecue and my verdict is he's a better lawyer than a griller because he got us the win in the suit against my sister-in-law and my mother-in-law, both divorced by their respective husbands today. We insisted on an order against my mother-in-law too but had no luck. The good thing is we haven't needed it so far because she's learned her lesson or whatever goes through her head. My sister-in-law doesn't want to see her during her hospitalization so there's a breaking point in their relationship. No, my father-in-law doesn't want anything to do with her either so we don't hear much about her these days. We blocked her again after it stopped being useful to write what I could. My baby is fine, he was born very strong. Sometimes he clenches his fists and it reminds me of when I wanted to squeeze my sister-in-law and my mother-in-law's necks. It's enough to make me smile. I would never have reached that point but they pushed me to the limit. If my sister-in-law hadn't finally been arrested I don't know what would have happened. We had to get to the point where she attacked a pregnant woman for them to do something. Despite all our complaints and evidence it wasn't enough. But it's a happy ending so I'm not going to complain.